Hello, my fellow movie fans, and welcome to another episode of A Feast of Films Theatre with your hosts, Matthew Ayalew and Ethan R. Hill. How's that? That was good?
Ah, yeah. Classic. Classic.
Serious podcast.
It's very serious.
It's a very serious podcast.
Very surreal.
Yes, we can't goof around at all. We need to
No.
be incredibly.
We got our goofing out around.
Yes, just very serious. Just
Yes.
very focused. Hi.
Good day.
How are you?
I am quite well. How are you?
I'm doing quite well as well. I forgot the name of the show. Oh, no.
Well, welcome to A Feast of Films.
No, I'll say that.
I gotta help you here. So,
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Feast of Films. I'm Ethan R. Hill. We're missing Matt Ayalew today. He is gone for some vacationing, I believe, is what he told me.
Mhm.
Probably he just didn't want to talk to me for like 2 weeks.
that checks out.
I mean, like, honestly, yeah, I'd do the same.
I mean, I live with you and I don't even want to talk to you.
That's why I haven't seen you for like 3 weeks.
That checks out. It has nothing to do with our schedules being completely backwards or what have you.
No, completely.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, Jesse's here as well.
Hi, everybody.
We brought him back to fill in for Matt because, well, we couldn't find anyone better, so.
Yeah.
How
That's
are
true.
you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm very tired, but I'm here ready to talk movies with one of my best friends, and I think that'll be a good time.
Who else do we have on the show then?
Oh, no. Fair enough. Alrighty.
I'm one of your best friends?
Last time I checked,
Oh, man.
as long as that check clears.
We both know I didn't write a check.
Oh, God. Who writes checks anymore?
That's what I was just thinking. I'm like, do you think either of us actually, if we
we-
sat down and someone's like, hey, we need you to write us this check, would we either of us like know what to do without Googling it or anything like that?
Like, I feel like we could figure it out, but like, it's like, whatever, like, you could get a checkbook for X amount of money. Like, why would I want that? I'm not, I could just e-transfer people things.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I got a check from work, and I actually, this is the first time I've ever done this. I accepted it through my phone. It was the weirdest thing in the world, but it was kind of cool.
Because you don't have e-transfer set up through your work, I'm assuming.
No, it was for something else.
Okay.
Because I got my regular pay, but then there was something else they gave me a check for, and it was like,
Oh, it's awesome.
it was weird, and I was kind of sketched out by it, but I also really needed the money, so,
Mm.
so I was like, well, I guess we're doing this now.
Yep, not saying no to that.
But, yeah, no, I feel like if it came to writing a check, both of us would have no idea what we were doing.
Yeah, I think we could figure it out, but yeah, it would be a whole process
I'd
get
still-
it going.
I'd be consistently like, am I filling out enough? Is this too much? Like, what do I put in the, like, memos? Like, what do I write?
Yeah.
What's okay?
Are we talking a salutation or a Christmas card? Like, how complex are we talking here?
For a check?
Yes.
What do you mean, a salutation or a Christmas card?
Like, is it a little bit of information, or am I writing a soliloquy? Like, what are we doing here?
What's that in relation to a Christmas card?
Because you gotta write something nice in a Christmas card. You gotta let people know you care. You can't just say Merry Christmas, ship it off. That's
Yes, people do that all the time.
well, that's rude.
Well, I mean, if you're shipping to like 10 different families.
That's fair. All 10 mafia families I collect checks from, so I'm their best friend.
It's you and your checks again.
Jesse Prosser does not receive money from mob families, although I'm open to it if you would like.
Maybe don't like record yourself saying that you're open to doing illegal activities.
No, there's
Just
nothing,
in case it ever happens.
there's nothing illegal about receiving money for no reason.
You never said for no reason.
Oh, right. Well, fair enough. Anyways, none of this is relevant.
I think it is, because you know who used to write a lot of checks? People in the 80s.
Oh, yes. Writing checks and cutting coke. We're going back.
Going back to the best time to be alive from what I've heard
Yes.
and from what I've seen through movies.
One of the fastest times to be alive, as it were,
Was it?
because of the cocaine.
Oh, I mean, like, that's right.
Yeah, no,
that's
it's all a big cloud.
of cocaine.
Yes. But yeah,
Can we say cocaine this much?
Well, I mean, we have.
Oh,
Who's gonna know?
I guess yeah. No one listens.
But yeah, I have been brought on today. Ethan and I were talking about discussing cinema of the 1980s, which I am all about as an individual.
Boy, you're such an awkward individual.
What?
Yeah. So yeah. No, that's Sorry, I gotta gather my thoughts here
Yeah, don't you giving me shit.
because I'm too busy laughing at you.
Oh, I'm so sorry that I'm so entertaining as a conversationalist. Sorry.
Big words, man.
Yeah.
But no, like the reason why I want to talk to you about the '80s specifically is basically for my entire time knowing you, that's kind of been like I don't want to say it's your identity because there's much more to you than the '80s, like.
It's true.
But
But I do own a lot of aviators, so
like it's something that like when I think of the '80s, I immediately think of you. Like that's basically just kind of the decade that I associate with you as a person.
mm-hmm.
And like maybe that's just like the sheer amount of '80s movies you've shown me.
Mm.
Like cuz I was watching '80s movies before
Yeah.
we met, but like there's a lot more that you've seen and there's a lot of that decade, even like the synthwave music that you listen to and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Like I'm steeped within like what I would consider I don't know, it's a weird like kind of subculture that has cropped up over the last like decade or so where it's like this and like a lot of it is like a lot of media has become very like 80s referential and like a lot of these franchises being brought back. You have Stranger Things, which is just like steeped so heavily in like the iconography of the 1980s. So like it's become a whole thing within even mainstream media, I would say.
But this has been going on for you for like I'd say for most of your life, like even before.
Oh yeah.
Because dude, you were a massive '80s fan before Stranger Things.
Oh, heavily.
Like-
Like that I was so excited for that show. Like
Also, just to preface this too, both of us were born in the early '90s.
yes.
So like we didn't grow up in the '80s. Like we didn't really have exposure, minus maybe some reruns on TV and stuff like that, like syndication and stuff. That,
I would say so, yeah.
but otherwise, like because for me, like if I think about like the stuff that I like, it's more so late '90s, early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really grew up with, that, and then also the stuff that my parents showed me, which wasn't '80s. It was definitely more '70s, '60s, even like the '50s.
Yeah.
Like man, like the stuff I got raised on was basically everything pre '80s.
Yeah.
Like I can go back and I can probably name something from each decade because like there's stuff from like even the '40s and '30s. Like, and then there's old radio shows. Like my family had me listening to like old timey radio from like the 1920s and stuff. Just like
Mark Rogers or all that stuff. Like
more so the comedy things, but like yeah, like it's very specifically like again the shows they had because they didn't have TV.
yeah.
Like this was
Well, because I know you've talked a lot about I know Green Hornet has been like one that you really like, as well as the Lone Ranger and like
and those started out on radio.
yeah.
Even Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, like that's always funny to me is that a ventriloquist made it big on the radio because it's like isn't that just voice acting at that point? But like
I guess it like that whole profession is kind of voice acting, but like the actual puppeteering is like the visual component to the voice acting.
well, and from what I understand too, old radio shows were actually like recorded in front of a live audience. Like it was basically recording kind of like a stage performance.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like you get Abbott and Costello, like
Mm-hmm.
those kind of guys. Like it's interesting the kind of stuff that I got raised on, but then how much of a blank slate it was around the '80s.
Right.
Like, and I don't know if that was just like a lot of the media in the '80s became really, really like heavy and really excessive.
Yep.
So like that's not exactly something that like you could show a child.
Yeah.
It's not something that my parents felt like they could show a child.
Yeah.
So that might be it. But like there's definitely like almost a hard cutoff of like the stuff that I would watch. I mean like and I guess like Indiana Jones and stuff would fall into the '80s,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't feel like the '80s, right?
Well, once again, the interesting thing about Indiana Jones is Indiana Jones was a throwback to like those older serials that you would have grown up on, and while it does have like its sensibilities kind of feel 80s-esque in the way it's made, it definitely feels like a story from an older time in the way that's told. You
Yeah.
know? Like that's why it's always weird, like, me considering like a lot of stuff Spielberg does, it doesn't feel like it's necessarily of its time. Like,
But then when you look at it through today's lens, like again, look at Ready Player One,
yeah,
and it's like, oh yeah, no, Spielberg is of its time. Spielberg is 80s,
yeah,
but like it wasn't. It was modern. When Spielberg stuff was coming out, it was modern stuff.
100%. Well, and like when you're talking about actually, the word that you brought up that like caught me was talking about the 80s is excess, because 100% a lot of like what was the theme of a lot of the 80s was excess, going bigger, being the best,
Pushing
being the
it to the
biggest.
limit,
Yes,
being
100%.
the best around.
Yep.
Um,
You're the best around. Yep, so
no
good.
one's ever gonna keep me down.
Like it was a very like everybody was high on their own, like,
Whether like actually high or just like metaphorically
yeah,
high.
it was a real like sensibility of just like wanting to be the best and feeling good, and like that's definitely like something that you see in a lot of 80s cinema. It's very like it gets very nonchalant and extreme, like you said. Like, even if you look at like the biggest example obviously would be Scarface, which to me is like one of the most like that. If I had to pick a specific movie to encapsulate a time period, Scarface is one of the ones I would choose, because that movie is all about excess and the dangers of excess.
Specifically the 80s time
Yeah,
period you're talking.
yeah, because it's like, it's the American dream, and I'm gonna make it big. I'm gonna be the hot shot, and then it just basically talks about all the horrible things that can happen from having that kind of dream, and all the pain that can come from it. But it's presented like, oh, this is great. It'll push you to the limit. Oh, it's so good, but like really, it's all horrifying. So it's like
I
it
feel like there's a better choice for that though.
like a lot of those movies, like RoboCop was another one that was kind of making fun of the excess of the time.
Which is funny because it's set in the future.
Yeah, but like that movie feels, while it is futuristic, it does feel very 80s, and like
What year is it set in?
um oh crap, I should know this. I honestly don't remember what year RoboCop was. I feel like it's like 2000 something rather. I'm have to look this up just to find out, but
Because like I feel like and like it's funny to me because like when I think about like I think excess is the right word for the 80s. Extreme I would say for the 90s or the 2000s.
oh, extreme is 100% the word specifically for the 90s.
No,
Extreme.
for the 90s it was extreme, and then for the 2000s it was also extreme, but they dropped the E at the front.
Yes.
So it's like, oh man, the 90s are pretty extreme, and then like the 2000s
Extreme.
and then 9/11 happened, and then it just everyone got sad
It's very true.
for good reason. Like again,
Yeah.
like but like
Yeah, it's not like, oh, why is everyone so sad? Bring down the party.
it was very things got real, and I think
Yeah.
that's where I think a lot of that's kind of the problem I have with a lot of cinema nowadays is that it's so bent on being real
Hmm.
that when movies try to go back to that 80s sensibility,
Yeah.
they don't hit it. It's just it's an echo of what it was,
Mhm.
and it feels kind of hollow sometimes to me. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
have the same feel. Even Stranger Things, I enjoy it, but it doesn't feel like the 80s. It feels
Mhm.
like it's set in the 80s, but it doesn't feel like the 80s. Even the same thing with the It movies. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, they have 80s references in them. Yeah, they have like some um cool imagery, but at the core it still doesn't it feels modern to me.
Yeah.
Like I know I've probably beaten this one to death, but like to me Ready Player One is the closest film I've seen recently that has both the 80s aesthetic as well as the vibe, but that comes down like I can't say too much about that because it comes down to Steven Spielberg directing it.
Yes.
So it feels modern, but it also has that 80s sensibility.
Well, and that comes down to the subject matter as well, because
One
it
and
is it's a society of like who the modern world is just so awful that the only real choice for any sort of like enjoyment is to look back, and the Oasis is essentially just like a haven for that kind of stuff.
no, exactly. And like even the ending of it too. It's like when I think me and you talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously not on the show, but like in our personal lives.
Yeah,
Like at the very end when they're they think they beat the villain, but then he opens up the door and he has a gun and stuff like that. Both me and you had a moment of like, oh, they're gonna end it by just killing the main character.
yeah.
Like both of us were like, oh no, guys, come on.
This is about to get real depressing.
And then it didn't. And I think that to me is an 80s ending, is because it's like, oh,
The villain learned his lesson, and he still got his comeuppance, got punched in the face.
because there's that beautiful moment where he when he sees that egg is being held, and he like I think there's a tear that rolls down his cheek.
Well, he sees, yeah, how
Because he started out like these kids, bright-eyed and like, oh man, like video games and stuff, this is cool.
yep,
And I became a businessman.
yep. Which also encapsulates the 1980s as well.
Evil businessmen.
Evil businessmen. You got your Gordon Geckos, you got your Dick Jones, like...
No one knows who any of these people are. Anyone listening to this is like, who?
Who are these characters? It was Dick Jones.
Did Gremlins 2 come out in the 80s or the 90s?
I think Gremlins 2 might have been 1990. I could be wrong. Because I know there was a bit of a gap between the first and second one.
1990.
Yep.
Yeah, it came out. So like,
And I'm gonna like have a controversial theory here that like 1990s movies are honorary 80s movies.
well, it's something me and you have also discussed a lot, where basically a decade when it comes to movies almost doesn't start until halfway through that decade.
Yes.
So like movies from 1975 to 1985, those feel like 90s movies, or those feel like 80s movies. I mean,
Yeah.
then when you hit 1986 onwards, or to 95, they all have a similar vibe to them too.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see the progression, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like anything. There really isn't like a hard cutoff for a style. It develops over time. So like when it was 1990, it wasn't suddenly like everyone's on skateboards and like eating pizza. And I'm just describing Ninja Turtles.
Well, and that's honestly though, the Ninja Turtles is kind of what started that. That's kind of what like really culturally lent into that. And they were doing that stuff, but they were doing that stuff in the 80s too, because the cartoon.
Oh, of course.
Because
Yeah.
the cartoon was in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So, like, and that's the thing, there's a lot of bleed over in culture, but I think cinematography wise and like cinematically speaking, there's especially in the 90s and the 2000s, I find there's this weird blurry line of like 80 from 88 to 92. It's kind of blurry as to what movies came out when.
Yes.
And then from like I'd say 98 to about 2000, 2001,
Yeah.
there's again this blurry what year did this come out? Whereas like, and that's to me where I think specifically up to 88,
Yeah.
like from 1980 to 88, there's this very specific tone that was the 80s,
Yeah.
right? Like, because around 88, when you hit Tim Burton's Batman in 89, you kind of you start getting to that weird 90s-esque feeling territory.
Oh, 100%.
And I think when me and you talk about films from the 80s, a lot of stuff we're talking about is from 80 to 88. We don't really talk about 89 films and go like, yeah, that's an 80s movie.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and like to me, because there's very specific years that to me are like highlights to me for big movies of the 1980s.
Is 1982 going to be one of them?
Well, of course. How could it not be? One of the best summers in cinema history.
Not for everybody.
Well, not for everyone. Not box office wise, mind you, because 1982 was ruled by E.T., so a lot of movies ended up suffering at the box office. But, like, I would say 82 84 and then 87 aren't in particular have like such strong lineups of movies. Like they tend to have those tend to be the ones that people talk about more than anything else. Because of course, like 82, you had like stuff like Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan, E.T., like I already mentioned, The Thing, Blade Runner, Tron, like a lot of big movies that like people remember fondly came out in 1982. Lots of really good animated movies. 84, you saw Terminator come out, Ghostbusters, Gremlins.
This is gonna sound like a joke question, but it's actually a serious question.
Mhm.
Did 1984 come out in 1984?
It did. I actually I looked in preparation for this. I looked up to see if 1984 came out in 1984, and it 100% did. So that's kind of hilarious. They're like, we got a marketing opportunity. It's just like when they released 2012 in 2012.
Gosh, did you ever watch that?
I did, yeah.
How, like, I don't know how I've managed to not see that one.
Well, it feels like a movie you would have seen.
Like, because I don't hate disaster movies. I like disaster movies, but like that one just felt like the actual jumping the shark of disaster movies. That was just like, well, man, these all these other disaster movies, it's like, oh, it's a volcano, oh, it's an earthquake, oh, it's these little things going on in this one little area.
2012 is it the
The
entire world
dies. Like
2012 happened and the earth destroyed itself, and
Well,
we
that
built giant ships to survive.
and that was kind of it. Like that opening scene. I don't even know if it's the opening scene. That scene where they're like driving through, I think, LA in the limo.
Yes, yeah.
Like I saw that. I saw the clip of that, and like I'm like, oh, so this is the whole movie. Is just them running away from the world collapsing. Okay, I guess how are they gonna get away from that? I don't care enough to watch this movie.
Yeah, and there's weird side bit with Woody Harrelson's character.
Wait, Woody Harrelson's in that movie?
Woody Harrelson plays like a weird hippie character type dude, if I'm remembering correctly. It's he's Woody Harrelson. He's like, I remember him having a jar of pickled eggs. I could be wrong. Like that sounds correct, but I honestly don't remember.
I only remember, like, again, I only thought John Cusack was in that. I didn't think there was...
John Cusack?
Yeah.
Who's John Cusack?
That's his name.
I only know John Cusack.
Oh.
I only know John Cusack, who was famous in the 1980s to begin with.
Yeah, and then no one cared about him after that. Actually, him in 1408 was amazing.
Yeah, man. Underrated movie. It's really well done.
Yeah. What about Joan?
Joan?
Yeah, his sister.
Joan Cusack. Yeah.
You don't know who she is,
I
do
do.
you?
I don't know much of Joan Cusack. No.
School of Rock.
At least I knew. Oh yeah. There you go. Well, at least I pronounced their last name correctly.
Who is she in School
She's
of
the
Rock?
teacher. She's the principal in School of Rock. Jack Black. Good.
It's not Jack Black.
It's not Jack Black.
Blavid Blue Company.
Blavid Blue Company. But anyways, speaking of Stephen King and 1980s, The Shining came out in 1980.
No, did it come out in 1980?
1980, yeah.
Why, that one feels like a 70s movie to me.
Right? Yeah, that's the thing. Like I said,
But I guess that's also Kubrick in a nutshell, right?
yeah,
Or is it Kubrick?
it's Kubrick to me. But no, there's a real sense of because the 70s, a lot of people characterize as a very kind of depressing era. There's a real counterculture type feel to everything, and it's very much against the establishment. And then a lot of the 1980s kind of tries to, the cinema of the 1980s kind of tries to reestablish
The establishment?
Yes.
Because it goes from yeah, it's got to tear everything down, man. Vietnam, man. It was terrible, man.
Yep.
And it's like, so anyone likes business suits and a lot of money?
Oh, yeah. One again, because I believe Apocalypse Now also came out in 1980 and also has a very 1970s kind of sensibility to it as well. It doesn't necessarily feel like an 80s film, but that's also because that movie took so long to freaking make. So, Apocalypse Now.
Oh. I tuned you out. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I mean, fair enough. I was rambling a little bit, but
I was looking up stuff on Joan Cusack. Or is it Cusack? I don't know how to
it's
pronounce it.
Cusack. Everyone knows it's Cusack.
I don't think so. It's like Cillian Murphy or Cillian Murphy. It's
Cillian. Yeah, I thought it was Cillian Murphy for the longest time.
Only if your parents hate you. I'm gonna give him a silly name.
Cillian?
Yeah, Cillian Murphy.
Cillian name?
I'm gonna give him a Sicilian
A
name.
Sicilian name. Hey.
But like
It's Sicilian Murphy.
Apocalypse Now 100% to me is a 70s movie. Like that's not. It doesn't feel like an 80s movie.
100%.
But what makes it like at the end of the day, to you, what makes that 80s movie? Like, what is that tone? What speaks to that tone? What brings that stuff out?
Well, to me, it's just it's kind of the attitude of it. Like, to me, the 80s feels very like it's kind of two different aesthetics, because like there is like that more like down and gritty type 80s flick, but then there is I don't know, it's like the like kind of like clean, hopeful, like fun feeling to it. Like you get that with stuff like Gremlins. Like Gremlins is a monster movie, but like it is so like it's so kind of light but kind of scary. It feels very like I don't know how else to describe it. Very mom and pop. Does that make sense?
It does. Like I'm just sorry. I've stumped myself with that question.
Ghostbusters also, I would say, falls into that category. Like there's a lot of like that kind of fun tonal
Return of the Living Dead.
Return of the Living Dead, which is just one of the best movies. Well, and like the other thing too was like the 1980s was kind of also ruled by like 80s horror in particular. Like a lot of people kind of cite as like one of the best decades of horror is the 1980s. In particular, like for the longest time, the box office was ruled by the slasher film, because it was like these weren't necessarily like big blockbusters, but like they were made cheap and they made a lot of money. So like
they'd make their money back easily.
Yeah, and then some. And like at a certain point, everybody was doing them. And funny enough, that trend was one that started kind of in the 70s, and then when we got into the 80s and it became more and more excessive, that's when it became more popular.
Well, because and I mean like that happened around that turn of that decade.
Mm-hmm.
Because like
Friday the 13th, 1980.
And Texas Chainsaw was the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was just kind of a slew of them throughout the 80s.
Yeah.
Like I'm really stumped on this though, because like Star Wars is a movie that took place in both the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
Like it perfectly within that thing, but it just that problem with Star Wars and using that as a barometer.
Well, Star Wars is
that it
such
feels
its own
like
thing.
Exactly. Alien is a good example of the tone difference between the 80s and other decades, because the first Alien feels like a 70s movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Aliens, holy crap, is an 80s movie.
Oh yeah, it's
excessive, it's got the big corporations, it's got the action, it's got the horror, it's got the over-the-top violence.
Yeah. Well, and like it still manages to keep a lot of that same
It still feels like
line.
Alien.
Yeah, it still has that through line, but like when you look at like the first, like Alien was a haunted house movie in space. Like,
oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
No, the Alien franchise perfectly encapsulates each of the decades that we've been talking about. Yeah. Because if you look at Alien, it feels like a 70s movie. If you look at Aliens, it feels like an 80s movie. If you look at Alien 3, it feels like that early 90s movie, because it was.
Yeah.
And Alien Resurrection, 100% is a late 90s, early 2000s movies.
Yeah.
Each one of those films has encapsulated perfectly the decade that they came out.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds like a no-brainer. Maybe that sounds like well, yeah, of course, that's when they came out.
Yeah.
Well, but the fact that it's the same franchise and encapsulate that tone.
I mean, you could also
Star Wars didn't do that.
Yeah, you could also look at Terminator for that as well, to a certain extent as well. If you look at
there's so much of a time jump between them, though.
No pun intended.
shut up. Get out of here. And I would say that one really, I think, to me, I disagree with you on Terminator. Because the first Terminator, the budget kind of helped reflect that. Whereas the second one, they obviously had a bigger budget.
Yeah, but like Terminator 2 was like one of the quintessential like 90s big action flicks. Like it is one of the ones that kind of made that a thing, you know? Cuz like you think of like 90s action, like I think of like
True Lies.
yeah. Well, yeah, True Light, well that because True Light was True Lies after Terminator 2? I feel like
Yes, it
yeah,
was.
it was 100% after Terminator 2.
It was that was mid to late
Yeah.
90s. Still same director though. And that's the thing too, is like we're looking at the same director.
But,
Whereas
but even if like you look at like Point Break, I would say Point Break also.
I've never seen Point Break.
Oh man, you gotta watch Point Break.
I know I've asked you to show me,
It's
and
so
you're always
good.
like, "Oh, we should watch this." I'm like, "Can we watch it now?" And you're like, "No."
I am an FBI agent. I know, ain't it rad? So good.
But specifically though, like, and that's the thing, like with Terminator 3 though, it's such a long gap. Like it's an 11-year gap between the two.
Yeah.
Because Terminator 3 I think was 2003.
Yes.
So it's such a long gap, and yeah, it does feel like that, but it also feels like a sequel that didn't know what it was doing.
Well, that's an understatement.
But that's also been every Terminator film since T2.
Pretty much, yeah.
They're like, we want to do something cool, and then they just drop the ball.
Yeah, like it's always the Terminator 1 and 2. There is no fable we make for ourselves. Most of the sequels, Judgment Day is inevitable.
I think all the sequels.
Pretty much.
Like,
well, because Salvation was a sequel to
Salvation is a sequel, but also a prequel.
Yeah, well, that's the weird thing about Terminator, ain't it?
Yeah. So anyway, back to Alien, though.
Yeah.
And the cool thing with that is, again, each one of those films, while being connected, like, it's a series, they are connected. Mm-hmm. They have that through line of Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
But they're each so distinctly their own decades movie.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars didn't have that, because even if you go from the original trilogy to the sequels, or the prequels to the sequels,
yeah,
they all still feel like Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't necessarily reflect the modern times that they're in.
Yeah.
Technologically speaking, kind of, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of other series that are like that.
Well, I'd say like Lord of the Rings also would like, because Lord of the Rings is such its own thing, but I wouldn't say it necessarily like they are 2000s movies, but I wouldn't say they specifically encapsulate that decade of cinema.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm trying to think of other movies that kind of encapsulate the tone of the years that they were made in, or the decades that they were made in.
Mm.
And that's because I'm still trying to figure out what exactly makes an 80s movie an 80s movie. What makes it that...
Well, I'd say to a certain extent it's... like it's...
Is it Dean Cundey?
It could be. It could be Dean Cundey. Famous cinematographer Dean Cundey. Went from working with John Carpenter and Steven Spielberg to working on Adam Sandler movies.
He's getting paid. That's the important thing.
That's the important thing. You know, Dean Cundey's gotta pay for his house. It's very important. One, either way, like, I mean, there isn't really, I guess there isn't any other way to describe, like, a 1980s movie than it's a 1980s movie. Because it's hard. Like, because, like, tone-wise, like I'd said, like, a lot of them have very, like, fun type tone. Compared to other decades, it's like 80s movies are very like rewatchable and like kind of feel comforting in a lot of ways, even the more horrific ones. Like there's a weird warmth to it.
But does that come from you specifically because you grew up with them? Is that a nostalgia thing? Because like for me, 80s movies don't hold a nostalgia for me.
Right.
Like
no, and I'd say that actually that's probably fair on my end. Like, again, I'm the guy who my grandparents showed me the first Terminator when I was like 8 or 9 years old, something like that.
Well, then you watched you watched a bunch of 80s movies before you even left for college, didn't you?
Oh yeah, well, I went through like kind of a binge fest for a while. Like I kind of discovered John Carpenter like kind of in my late teen years, and I binged a bunch of his movies, and I discovered like I knew like obviously I was a fan of like Schwarzenegger before that, but like I ended up like going through a whole bunch of Arnold Schwarzenegger's filmography, a whole bunch of Sylvester Stallone's. Like I discovered all those like 80s action guys.
Dolph Lundgren,
Dolph
Jean-Claude Van
Lundgren.
Damme.
Yep. Some Steven Seagal back when he was kind of good.
Wasn't he more of a '90s action star?
I would say so, yeah, but like some of his early stuff was like 1980s as well. Um, of course, like the Lethal Weapon films, like the first Lethal Weapon, like is just such a classic. I love the first Lethal Weapon so much. Um, but yeah, like I ended up like steeping myself in 1980s cinema just because like it just kind of clicked for me. It just felt good watching those movies, and like I watched so many of them, and I kind of just became this like Rolodex of like 1980s cinema after a while.
That's a very 1980s sentiment, isn't it?
Rolodex.
Like
Oh,
for
yeah.
you, is there anything like is it the editing? Is it the cinematography? Like, because there's got to be some kind of language that carries through it as well. Like, it's not just necessarily themes or stories. That's a part of it, but they all have such a diverse set of themes and stories. Like,
Yeah. Well, because like,
maybe the tech is also it. Maybe like the type of cameras.
well, because like when I think of a lot of like 1980s films, like a lot of like cinema of the 1980s was shot with like anamorphic lenses, which lends itself to that certain look. Obviously, like John Carpenter popularized that, and like that like lens flare type wide aspect ratio look like also feels big and larger than life, which lends to that feeling. But a lot of my favorite films also didn't shoot anamorphic as well. Like
Hmm.
you're talking RoboCop or like the first Lethal Weapon. Everything back then was shot on film. There was a certain pacing that films back then had. I can't think of specifically a whether it's like a tone thing or what have you, or like whether it's an aesthetic look. Like I don't know. It just like 80s. The 80s just like it has that feeling. There's a reason like when you see those montages, like all those movies, like they string them together and they feel like they belong together. You know, whether it's stuff like The Goonies, cutting into a clip of like Terminator, RoboCop, Lethal Weapon, um, Rambo First Blood Part 2. That was the other genre that like ruled the 80s as well, was the action film. Like we discussed already, like all those like action guys, but like
I'd say the teen comedy though. Also, like John Hughes films really ruled the '90s
yeah,
too. Like I think maybe that's a nice thing about like the '80s. At the end of the day, is there wasn't really
one
one
specific
specific
genre.
genre that ruled. Like,
Yeah. Well, because like again, like the '80s action flick was essentially they were the Marvel, like the comic book movie of their time. You know, when you go to the theater, like you were going to go see. Oh man, I'm going to go see the new Schwarzenegger movie.
oh, would you say that like so? You're basically saying that Marvel to you, Marvel and franchises have kind of supplanted the movie star.
To a certain degree, yes. Well, and I guess that's another thing too. Like in the 1980s, like there was like there were actors and like movie stars, and it like really is the time where like those things collided, because it was like you had like the big personalities, but you also had the guys who were like really known for like being character actors, as well as just people who were like got really steeped in the craft, and they all kind of collided in the 1980s,
Yeah,
because like there was a lot of like character actors that were popular at the time. Obviously, you got the guys like Jeff Goldblum, um, Christopher Lloyd. I would call Christopher Lloyd a character actor.
yeah.
Um,
Chris Walken.
Christopher Walken, Brad Dourif, like, and but then you had like obviously like the movie stars, like that old Hollywood sentiment of like the movie star, which like a lot of those were like the big action guys. So like it's this weird like nexus point of all these different sentiments from different decades, all culminating, and like again talking about the nostalgia factor, like Reagan's America was a lot about bringing back the good old days. So a lot of stuff like again Back to the Future kind of encapsulates that idea, because It is a 1980s movie, but primarily it takes place in the 1950s,
Yeah.
and that movie has a loving, fond memory of that decade. Bring back the good old times. Heroes were heroes and villains were villains.
And Biff was Biff.
Biff certainly was Biff.
I know you've mentioned in the past how like a lot of stuff for you actually have that tie for like the stuff you grew up with. You watch the 80s and you watch the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And even with Back to the Future, like you just mentioned, it's an 80s film, but it's steeped in the 50s.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the remakes that happened in the 80s, they were of movies from the 50s.
Yes, 100%.
You have The Blob, I think The Fly.
Yep, The
It's
Fly
unranked.
was 1983, I think.
I'm talking about the original one being
Oh, like the
50s. I
yeah,
can't remember if it's 50s or 60s.
yeah,
There's The
100%.
Thing.
Yep, The Thing. Like
You're
side-
surprised. You're surprised they didn't remake them.
I mean, honestly, yeah. Well, I mean, they kind of did. Like there was a there was like Arachnophobia, which was like the giant spider movie.
Oh yeah, but them is giant ants.
Them is giant ants. I'll remake them at some point.
But do you think that's the? Do you think those decades just go hand in hand?
Well, I've talked about this to a certain extent before. Where like in cinema, things almost come in cycles. Like, and if you look at like the 30-year gap between like the 50s, the 80s, and then like the 2010s, the 2010s was around the time that like they started trying to bring back stuff from the 1980s, like rebooting franchises and things like that. So like I do think there is a certain connection with like the amount of time that passes and the feeling of nostalgia.
Yeah.
Like, because people who grew up with those things, like a decade or two go by, they start to reminisce about their childhood. They want to bring it back. They start getting in a position where they can start making things. So then they start bringing those things back. 3 decades pass again, and like you can even like look at that to a certain extent with the 60s and the 90s, and now we're into the 2020s.
Yeah.
And like I can like I can almost guarantee you we're going to start seeing a lot more of those like 90s type franchises start coming back because of that as well.
And then the 2000 franchises will pop up in 2030.
Yeah, that's what
That's the recorded prediction of Jesse Prosser.
Yep, we'll get the somebody will do a remake of Fast and the Furious. Try to turn it into a serious drama.
Could you imagine?
Oh,
the first one kind of was.
I'm here for it, man. I'm very excited. I'm excited for Jacob Tremblay to play Paul Walker's character, and
Would you get to play? Would Vin Diesel just be playing Vin Diesel?
yes,
Still?
he'll still be.
He'll still be Dom.
On a complete side note, I just saw somebody posted a clip from the 5th Fast and the Furious where it's like The Rock is walking up to Vin Diesel's character. I think it's near the end of the movie, and like it's very clear that they specifically they didn't even do a very good job, but they made The Rock look like as tall as Vin Diesel to make Vin Diesel and The Rock look like they're the same height. But it's not done very well. It's like they rotoscoped The Rock and made him smaller. It's really
Like cut him out and just
yeah, like it's
bump him
really
down.
bad. And I'm just like, how much money did they spend on that shot?
could have
Because
got an Apple box.
yeah, right? It would have been a lot easier. But that's clearly they got into post and they said, "Oh my God, The Rock is making Vin Diesel look way too short." I thought that was pretty funny.
Hey, you look pretty funny.
They'll never know. It's a podcast.
Oh. Zing.
Oh my God.
I didn't think of that one through.
Win for Jesse. Certified fresh.
I hate you so much. Certified Fresh is gonna become your new thing.
Yes, I'm gonna start using that in regular conversation.
Oh, I'm slowly starting to convert people at work to saying word instead of copy. And it's the greatest thing in the world.
You're gonna change the industry.
Trent started to actually have people say word to him, as opposed to like a couple of the other PAs that I work with. They've said word to him, even in the emails and like stuff like that. And then one of the other assistant location managers said word to me a little while ago, and I told him, and I'm like, I'm slowly taking over because I refuse to say copy unless I'm on a walkie. I will not say copy.
Copy that.
Exactly.
Yo, this is kind of the walkie.
It's not a walkie. It's a microphone.
Same thing.
No, it's not.
Certified fresh.
Oh,
Um,
you're the worst.
but you know what wasn't certified fresh in its time though? John Carpenter's The Thing.
You just want to talk about The Thing?
I do.
Oh no.
Because
We talk about that mediocre movie.
my favorite movie of all time came out in 1982 and was crushed at the box office because of E.T.
Well, my favorite movie came out in 1985, and it didn't,
I mean, it's true.
because I actually have a good movie for my favorite movie, and you have.
John Carpenter's The Thing is one of the best horror movies ever made. I'll have you know.
It's a movie.
Well, like again, that's the funny thing. Like you talk about like you don't really necessarily have a strong nostalgic connection to the 1980s, and yet your favorite movie came out in the 80s
Because it's a good movie.
because it's a good movie. Like, and I think at the end of the day, like good movies, regardless of decade, will span the test of time. Like, it's kind of the old adage that like what's it called? Like the good eggs will float to the top.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, it's essentially the idea that like I can't remember if it's eggs or what have you. I'm probably misquoting this 100%, but it's like if you throw a bunch of eggs into a boiling pot, only the good ones will rise to the surface.
Well, no, because when the eggs are done boiling, they float.
Well, that's yeah.
That's how
That's
you know
like-
they're done.
That's anyways. It's not eggs, but I'm using eggs.
It's not a good metaphor.
It's not a good metaphor, but to me,
Well, like, you got to think about it from the perspective of like how many movies that we don't know,
Mhm.
how many movies have we not seen or never heard of because they were released and tanked.
yeah. Well, like we actually just watched one, Into the Night, starring Jeff Goldblum and Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh yeah, what was it again? It's like it was a $15 million movie and they made 10 million back or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Like it flopped hardcore, but we just watched it and like, oh, it was
It
really
was
good.
delightful. It was
was a good
great.
movie.
Like,
We were shocked to find out that it did flop.
well, and apparently people just absolutely like, yeah, it's got a 38% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But like we've been finding that recently, that a lot of the stuff that have bad ratings or people don't like, me and you were like, no, this is really great. Why do people hate this so much?
Well, and that's kind of like the beauty of a lot of like some of these companies like Arrow and Shout Factory and I would say Criterion would also fall into this as well. Like
Yeah.
a lot of these movies that kind of like either fell through the cracks or didn't get their time in the sun, or maybe they like didn't necessarily work as well in the decade they came out. They kind of get a second life on home video and get rediscovered by people.
It was 8 million it was, and they made back 7.5 million.
Oof,
So,
that's a hard flop right there.
but like I think that's the thing that like I don't know, like I enjoy that. I enjoy half the time when I see a really bad rating on a movie, I need to know why. I need to watch it to be like, okay, but like why?
But yeah,
And there's been a lot of really movies that have great ratings that I've watched, and I'm like, this, why? I don't get it. Like I don't understand.
yeah.
So anyway, back to John Carpenter's The Thing, which is actually a phenomenal movie.
Yeah, that's what
Except
I thought.
for one effect. One effect.
When Windows encountered a critical error.
Yeah. The effects in that movie are so amazing that like again when you just see that one that's like a little wonky, like if that effect was in any other horror movie, any other John Carpenter movie, any other film,
Yeah.
I wouldn't think twice about
Well,
it. I'd be like,
if,
oh, okay.
if that effect was in Reanimator, you'd just be like,
Oh yeah, that's just how it is.
oh, it's
Okay,
hilarious.
cool, yeah. But like, because it's in The Thing, and the rest of the effects are so much more elevated. Like, dude, the walking head.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
One of the best effects in like any monster movie.
I don't know how they did it. Is it stop motion? Is it an animatronic puppet? Is it a bunch of strings? How?
A little combination of everything, really.
And
Except I don't think stop motion. They use stop motion at the end of the movie for the Blair thing.
and it looks a little weird, but even then, like, stop motion still holds up. Like, it's such a weird movie,
Yep, every trick of the book.
and it just, like, oh man, like, no, it's so good. It is probably one of his best films.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's my favorite. We've discussed this. We've discussed which one is my favorite, and I can't remember what it is.
Like, I know you...
Prince of Darkness. I think
Yeah.
it's Prince of Darkness.
Yeah, I know you love Prince of Darkness.
I love the theology behind it and the whole, like, mythology they're trying to build on it.
Shit, man, we should have just done a John Carpenter podcast.
That's next. We can do a whole deep dive into John Carpenter next week.
I'm fine with this.
It's the lowest.
Tune in next week.
It's the lowest effort of thought process we have to do
Tune in next week for a Feast of Carpenter.
with the walrus.
Yes, the Feast of Walrus and the Carpenter. Talk about John Carpenter.
But which one is the walrus?
Cuckoo,
Cuckoo.
Meowza.
Oh, I guess yeah. That's got to become my catchphrase now.
Yep.
I gotta bring Meowza to the
Yeah,
people.
you have Meowza, I'll have certified fresh.
Meowza.
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 But yeah, Prince of Darkness it's one of those movies where, like, it's not, like, I always hate saying, like, it's a hard movie to grasp the first time you watch it, but legitimately, like, Prince of Darkness is one of those movies that's hard to grasp the first time you watch it.
I have watched it probably about 10 times, and there are things that I'm still picking up on and missing.
Well, because it's just, it
The
talks about...
mythology within that movie is just so deep.
Yeah, like, you could probably turn Prince of Darkness into, like, a TV series, and, like, you would have enough to work with from just the springboard of that film.
Yes.
Because there's so much, like, it talks about, like physics and, like, how matter and antimatter relate to, like,
The creation of the universe.
Yeah,
and like
and God and the idea of anti-God and, like, Satan, like, alternate
it's
realities,
absolutely bizarre.
time travel, like, and messages through dreams. Like, it's a weird friggin' movie, but
We'll get into that more a different
yeah,
time.
it's very well done.
But yeah, so like for the thing for you, like is it just the whole of the package that you love, or is it like because that one to me doesn't necessarily feel 80s. Like it isn't really an 80s movie.
No.
But it is. But it just again like John Carpenter's tone of film.
Yeah.
Kind of overshadows the decade.
Yeah. Well, like a John Carpenter, like you could say that about a lot of directors, honestly. Like a John Carpenter movie just kind of feels, especially like in his run from like The Fog all the way to like They Live, like a John Carpenter film feels like a John Carpenter film. It just so happens his big run was in the 80s, so it gets like that 80s association, you know? But to me, like, it's like a lot of those movies at the time, like, you had a fantastic ensemble cast, like, brilliant practical effects, shot really well, like, the story's engaging. And to me, like, that's, like, very limited as far as locations are concerned, because, like, it's just like, it's the extreme version of 12 Angry Men. They're all locked in a place together, and they gotta figure out who's the alien. I might be misremembering 12 Angry Men.
You're very much misremembering 12 Angry Men.
What's the old guy? Didn't he fall on the table and they had to resuscitate him and then a thing came out of his chest?
No, that's not at all what happened.
Or am I thinking of Alien? Am I thinking of John Hurt? Was John Hurt in 12 Angry Men?
No, John Hurt was not in 12 Angry Men.
Oh my god.
Henry Fonda.
Henry Fonda. Fond Hurt.
Oh, shut up.
But no, like, it's that, like, powder keg tension that works so well in that film. Like, there's a, like...
Again, you set up that bomb. And then you don't tell your audience where it is. They know it's there.
Well, and the best part about the thing is, like, yeah, they set up the bomb, and then they spend a half hour not even showing the bomb, and you almost forget the bomb exists until it fucking explodes in your face. Because they're like, oh my god, he's having a heart attack, and, like, at this point you've completely forgotten that, oh my god, someone might be the alien. Like, there's always that constant threat, but it's not like the thing is jumping out at people in corridors every 10 minutes. Like,
I'd say they do that throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Because again, you get that opening shot where there's that spaceship, and you're like, oh, aliens! And then no aliens are talked about. And then they find the Norwegian base and find the videotape, and they're like, "Oh, aliens again!" And you're like, "Oh, aliens!" And they find like, and they're like, "Oh, okay, what's this gonna be about?" And then the dogs happen, and then
Well, and the interesting thing about the thing is they are far less. I know I made a pun. They are far less concerned and intrigued at the fact that they just like discovered alien life, and they're like it. The fact that it's alien life doesn't really even matter at the end of the day. They just need to figure out what it is, where is it, and how do we deal with it. Like the fact that it's an alien is kind of inconsequential to their survival. Like there's not really that moment where they're just like, oh my god, we like in the original 1950s movie where they have that like, we found a flying saucer. Oh my god, this will be the biggest news. It's gonna be on all the newspapers.
well, again, like when you discover that stuff, the difference is again in the 1950s one and even in the prequel, they've discovered the alien, and they're like, "Ooh, we don't know what this alien is. Poke it with a stick."
Yep.
The thing is, in the original The Thing, in the 1982 The Thing, the Thing poked them with a stick first.
Yes.
Because it's like, oh man, we have this random dog. Oh my gosh, what is that? And why is it killing all the other dogs?
Oh my god. It just exploded into horror.
Yeah, like, and that's basically it. That's kind of overshadowed. Because in the meantime, they're also. Because one of their guys got shot, right?
Yes, Bennings gets shot like right at the beginning of the movie by a Norwegian.
Yeah, so one of them is injured.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really thinking like, oh my gosh, what happened? And
Yeah, they're just like those crazy Swedes or Norwegians.
And then by the time that they find what happened to the Norwegian base and everything else that's going on, that's when the dog shows up and is like, oh no, I need to escape.
Pretty much. Like it's one of those like it's brilliantly done the way that it presents the creature, and also like because like you have like Blair who's a scientist, and like you have Fuchs, and you have like the doctor and all that, and like they're all like for the most like there's like a handful of like kind of more scientist type characters, but for the most part it's a lot of like kind of more blue collar worker type people who are just trying to deal with this extraterrestrial that is trying to assimilate them and escape into the earth, you know? And that's where it gets kind of it's relatable.
Is it?
Kind of.
Okay.
I mean, I could never relate to McCready. I could never grow a beard that great.
I don't know if beard growing makes you relate to people.
Yeah.
I've related to people with beards. I've related to people without beards.
I mean, it's fair.
Yeah.
But there's an unspoken connection when two people can grow beards.
I wouldn't know.
Neither would I. Anyways.
Just like me and you can't connect over growing hair.
That's true. But they'll never know. This is audio.
You can't keep saying that.
I demand that my icon have long flowing locks.
I can't promise that it'll happen, and you'll probably be the same as the one that we've used in the past.
Fair enough.
You at least get aviators.
I like that. It's still in theme.
So you mentioned you have a question for the day for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like, my question of the day was going to be, what was the best decade for film in the 1980s? But I think we kind of discussed it briefly already. Like, at least for me, like, it's kind of a weird three-way tie between, like, 1982, 1984, and 1987.
See, I think mine is 85.
Okay.
Like...
85 I'm not quite as familiar with, so...
Like, I think it is. Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna look up a list.
Well, like, I'll list off a handful from 87, and I'll see if you agree with me to a certain extent. Because you had RoboCop, Lethal Weapon, The Untouchables, Predator, The Running Man. Like, it just a solid run of films came out in 87. Like, and I guarantee you there's far more that I'm just not remembering right now.
Why do they need to be alphabetized? I just want them to be really... I just want to see a list. Because 85, you got The Goonies, Breakfast Club, Clue, Legend, Color Purple, Teen Wolf.
Teen Wolf
View
solid.
to a Kill, Reanimator, Fright Night, Weird Science, Day of the Dead, Rocky 4, Commando, Brazil, Return to Oz. Come on, phone.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to break out 82 for this conversation.
Fletch, Black Cauldron, Silver Bullet, Back to the Future. There's more. I feel like there's a couple that I didn't see. Oh, Lady Hawk. Yeah, dude, from my Explorers, my my answer is 100% because like, yeah, I gotta say my answer is 85.
Okay.
Like, because how many of the movies that I just listed there are ones that I've talked to you about how great these movies are.
Yep. And honestly, like, I'm going to break out 1982 so that we can make this interesting. Because in 1982, we had such classics as Blade Runner, Conan the Barbarian, The Thing, of course, that we discussed, Rocky 3, Poltergeist, E.T., Secret of Nim, Tron, like I mentioned before, the Black, was it Dark Crystal? Oh, the Dark Crystal. I almost said Black Cauldron. I'm like, wait, that's not that.
No, I was in 85.
Oh my god. Creep Show, which we both love. Creep Show.
Cocoon?
First Blood, which is one of the best Sylvester Stallone performances of all time. Last Unicorn, which is just a trip of a movie. Gandhi, King of Comedy. Gandhi, King of Comedy.
I think those are two very different movies.
Wrath of Khan, of course. Can't go without talking about Wrath of Khan. Class of 84, that's a movie you watched recently, isn't it?
Yes, that was a fun movie. Is the wrong word.
Ironically, Class of 84 came out in 1982.
That's because it was set in the not so distant future
of 1984.
I love it and hate it when movies do that, where it's like,
in the future,
yes.
2 years from now. I mean, Escape from New York takes place in like 1997.
I missed when that happened.
Oh yes.
Yeah, man. The deeper I look into this list, like 1985 is probably my pick. Like, there are good movies throughout the 80s, but like majority of the ones that I've talked about, it would be 85. Even Legend of Billie Jean is in 85.
That's a movie I still gotta watch.
Return of the Living Dead was in 1985.
Do you want to party, Ethan?
Yeah, it's party time.
It's party time.
Saint Elmo's Fire, which I still need to see.
Elmo's Fire. No, you can say it. You do it better, Elmo.
I'm not.
You're not going to do Elmo on the podcast. You want these people to respect you still.
Yes, I will build up to that eventually.
Fair enough.
If there's enough comments below telling me to do it, I will.
Please comment below if you'd like Ethan to do his Elmo impression on the podcast.
I will give in to peer pressure eventually, but it is
not
this day.
We need 3 comments, and we will. We're going to make this happen.
Don't just say 3 comments.
I'm saying 3 comments. We gotta.
I feel like your picks. I feel like your picks for your best decade is because there are like 1982, The Thing came out. 1987, Predator came out.
Mm-hmm.
In 1984, I have no idea what came out.
Terminator, Gremlins, Ghostbusters, like just to name a few.
Yeah, just to name a few. Me. Shut up. Is that it? Is that the end of the podcast?
Could be. Like, did you have a question?
No, we only do one question.
Oh, right. I forgot the format of this, even though I edit it every week.
Can you tell how much he listens to our show?
It's fine. You do your little podcast.
Yeah, I'll do that. Whoa. Oh, boy.
Alrighty.
All right. Well, I think that's another episode of Feast of Films. Mr. Prosser, where can the good people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at thatjprosser. You can...
He has nothing else. He has Instagram and our movie. That's it.
I have an Instagram star, and that's it. No, you can find me on YouTube as well, under my name, Jesse Prosser. There's a couple short films on there you can check out.
Nothing really good.
Okay.
Like, who worked on those?
You actually.
I know.
A little bit. Actually, there was one I shot, acted in, edited myself.
And then I color corrected and wrote the music for.
Because I am a true auteur.
It was only elevated by the color correction and the music, though.
Oh, okay. I made the crave decision to shoot in 30 frames per second.
Yeah.
Totally had nothing to do with the fact that I had a camcorder that only shot in 30 frames per second. But, fun stuff.
Yeah, you creative genius.
Oh,
you.
I'm such a genius.
You're such an artiste.
An artiste. And, of course, you can find Ethan and I's film Damned Rights at realhouse.org. Give it a rent, give it a buy, check it out.
Stream it, download it, do whatever you want with it. Show your friends.
Buy it and never look at it. I'm fine with that.
Exactly. We don't care. Give us your money.
It's was the one line in Straight Outta Compton when they're like burning all the CDs and
Well,
like
at least
destroying
they're
them.
buying it.
Yep. They bought it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Alrighty. What about Ethan? Where can the people do things? Look at your stuff.
People can find me anywhere they look. If they look in the trees and see the wind blow, they can look and see me in nature.
This is my
They
body.
go to the ocean and they can see me in the waves. I'm all around. No, you can
Ethan's finally lost it.
You can find me on Instagram at Ethan R. Hill. You can also find me on YouTube at Ethan R. Hill. And as Prosper said, you can find our movie. You can also find Matt at wherever Matt is. He's on vacation, so I don't know where he is right now. But yeah, he'll be back.
It's like, where's Waldo?
Where's Matto?
Where's Matto? Where's Ayalew?
There he is!
Oh my god.
Little do we know he's been coming to visit us this entire time.
Oh my god. That's the ghost in the walls.
Matt from the future?
Yes. Matt to the future.
He became a ghost and then he's haunting us.
Yes.
Alright, well that's another episode of A Feast of Films. I'm Ethan R. Hill, and with me, not always, but is usually editing it for us, is...
Jesse Prosser.
We will see you all next week. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
So long.
Toodaloo.
That was weird.
It always is.